Hello and good morning out there, traders. It is April 26, 2024, and welcome to the Apteros DMI. Let's dive into what's going on here from yesterday. Pretty much nailed the DMI spot on with what was going on yesterday. Our general game plan was that we were at this kind of neutral area coming into the open here. We were paying attention to this zone. It was neutral in the morning because we were looking for the market to stabilize in this region. And if we got the stabilization of the bulls, this became a bullish zone, and this was the main line in the sand. Scenario one was holding up above that area, continuing up into this zone, and then possibly into this zone as well. And then scenario two was a full breakdown of this zone, heading down into lower destinations as well. So almost exactly what I was talking about in yesterday's DMI played out here. We ended up selling off right into this area. No real reason to get long yet because we didn't really stabilize here yet. Then we get that final push from the sellers, and this is where the stabilization starts. So if you're paying attention to a situation like this and you end up seeing another one of these someday in the DMIs, this is what I'm talking about whenever I say stabilization, right? You're looking for this area, not this specific rectangle, but this area to hold for bulls. And then once you see kind of like bullish reaction in this zone, okay, that's the first piece of information. Then you get a little bit more of a shallow pullback and you get the higher low. Once you see the higher low here, that's scenario one, that's stabilization. Now this becomes a bullish zone as we look for this market to kind of release out of that area. And that's exactly what we ended up seeing right into our first target here, without any real major, pullbacks besides maybe this area here. But straight up into that destination, kind of meanders around in that zone for a little bit until the end of the session, really. And then right around the end of the session, a blast through, obviously, on probably some earnings reports and things like that. So that's generally how it played out. But this sequence here is really important for people to study whenever it comes to something, whenever I call it stabilization, right? Where we have a neutral area that could be bullish. We have to wait for the market to show us that information. And we start to see that piece of information pretty much all through this section right in here. And then once we get this higher low and we start to really release out of there, you could have played it, a risky play would have been kind of anticipating a higher low here. In other words, kind of getting in on the turn at this area. The other way to do it is kind of looking at this whole area and saying, okay, if we break out of this zone, now I'm bullish and I can get in on some shallow pullbacks or pullbacks into the area. So something like, in here, and you could take the risk of like the whole area in general and just looking for the first target, right? So if you're just doing risk reward on this area alone, you one, definitely a two, probably a 3-1. If you played it more along the lines of like, I need to see it hold here and break out. Once it breaks out, I'll take the risk of the zone, something like that. So just some tactics there, discussing, a little tactical discussion around the DMIs, because yesterday was such a good opportunity to study some tactics along with, some changing price action in an area we were looking for bulls to kind of hold. So now taking a look at today, we're in a very tricky spot. I explained a lot of this to the students, and the reason why it's tricky is because we kind of have two conflicting reads on timeframes that are right up against one another and timeframes that are relatively important to the intraday environment. So at this point, we're kind of out in neutral territory here, and the reason why we're neutral mainly is because this area here is kind of a destination. It was the destination for this bullish move that we were kind of tracking from yesterday all the way out into here. So very similar to what we had going on yesterday where, well, if this area holds, it becomes a little bit more bearish. If this area gets down below here, we get more bearish as well. The problem is that our higher time frame is bullish. So as we continue to move lower and lower, things get more and more and more bullish. If that, kind of makes sense. But that's the way in which these things kind of work sometimes. So we're in a spot where generally we're neutral, and the best way for me to kind of describe the scenario here is if we hold this upper line in the sand, that's our most bullish scenario in that we can expect kind of a push up to this first target area. And if we get beyond that, this is the main destination for the stretch target on the bulls up into here. So that would be our most bullish type of scenario without any real dissonance. If we get down below this area, this neutral zone here, then we start to see the dissonance between the two time frames interacting with one another. And as we get lower, we end up running into some areas that make a lot of sense on other time frames for bulls to engage in this market. So this would kind of be like scenario 1 would be the most bullish. That would be kind of an all clear for bulls heading up to the upside. If we start seeing scenario 2, where we break down this line in the sand, then we come into areas where the neutral zones are a little bit more bullish in terms of their nature. And every one of these neutral areas here down into the main bullish line in the sand is an opportunity for bulls to stabilize the market, like we were talking about yesterday, kind of stabilize and release, stabilize and release. And of course, the reason why I'm saying today it's a lot more of a neutral landscape is because it's a little bit more short term in terms of if we get scenario 2. If scenario 2 starts to develop, then it's a little bit more short term in the fact that like the downside can run into some inflections for the bulls that will hold and possibly release based on the higher time frame. So it's a tricky landscape overall. So I'm not really going to officially put out these are the specific line in the sand trade locations. What I can say about today in terms of DMI is that we're generally bullish. We have neutral areas, 3 of them to pay attention to until we get down to test the main line in the sand. Now, if we get a full bearish move down in the line in the sand, that's pretty straightforward. Scenario 1 is that you hold that zone. Scenario 2 is that you break it down going into this target area. Scenario 1, obviously, you use the neutral references is kind of destinations as you continue to possibly traverse back up. The overall, if we get this line in the sand test, the overall destination would be this top one. That would be the main target for everything narrative-wise. But these shorter targets are definitely places to pay attention to for inflections. All right. The first target area for scenario 1 really would kind of be this neutral zone here, because that's the one that makes sense with the structure. And then from there, the stretch target would be the higher one. All right. So that's the overall kind of landscape today. It's a lot more scalpy out here, especially if we start to hold below this area, because then you start running into some situations where the bulls have, relatively, decent opportunity at neutral references down below as well. So sorry about another complicated DMI. Similar to what we were talking about yesterday, there's some tactics involved with what's going on here today. So not the most straightforward situation. No official line in the sand for today besides the lower one. The lower one is kind of the official line in the sand, but you can see in terms of where we're at in trade location and such, it's just a little far out there. So in that case, if we start seeing the breakdown of this neutral zone, then it's a little bit more of a scalpy environment. If we hold above it, easy to kind of call it more bullish overall in the context, a little bit more aggressive on the bullish side of things, and then we would be targeting the 2 upper neutral zones. So hopefully pay attention to all these details. I know it's a lot more tricky, like I said. Not going to put out an official line in the sand. More scalpy down below, more bullish up above, and as we go lower, the market starts getting more and more bullish down into this line in the sand area.